Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bring to the stage now a talented Washington Times writer, Cheryl Chumley. She's a regular on Jonathan E. Mord's Truth Trial radio program on the Genesis Communications Network and the author of a new book, Police State USA, available through Amazon.com. Please welcome Washington Times reporter, Cheryl Chumley. Thank you, Cheryl.
First, thank you, Jonathan Ebert. Thank you for all the radio shows and the support that you show my work at the Washington Times and my book, and this honor tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you to my husband, Doug, for everything. I love you. Thank you. And all glory to God. So it was a few weeks ago, and I was with my 7-year-old daughter on the porch, and I mentioned to her that I had to start writing a speech. And she asked me what it was for, and I said it has to be something political. And she said, "Oh, I can do that." And she ran and she grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, scribbled something, and threw it at me and said, "Here, let's go play." So she put so much work into it that I wanted to share it with you tonight. She wrote, "Let me tell you how Obama is a horrible president. He is a liar, pants on fire. He cheats at elections, and he doesn't know what he's doing. And he doesn't like the Declaration of Independence, and he's breaking a rule from George Washington." And then she drew this picture of me so you know that I wrote it and signed my name. So that concludes the visual portion of my remarks. But I thought about what she wrote, and I thought that raises an interesting point, because this is where we're at in America right now. We have a government of liars, spinners, self-interests, special interests, elitists, a government that passes laws that it doesn't even want to apply to itself, like Obamacare, a government that doesn't think anything of spying on innocent Americans, of using regulatory controls to steal private property rights, of suspending a star student for bringing a plastic knife to school, of denying a young girl the ability to sell lemonade in her driveway without first paying a $50 permit, and of outfitting police in military gear and sending armored vehicles to serve no-knock warrants on drug suspects, and then shrugging when someone innocent is killed or injured. Those are all true examples of how suffocating our governments become, and they're recent. You really don't have to spend a lot of time researching to find cases of how government is killing the Constitution. You only have to turn on the news, flip on the radio, scour through the internet, with one caveat. You really have to know which news to watch, which radio stations to listen to, what broadcast to tune into. Because to hear mainstream media talk, Obama's justified in acting like a king, bragging about a phone and a pen, no need for Congress. To hear mainstream media talk, ISIS or ISIL, whichever you prefer, is a JV team. The IRS never had it in for the Tea Party. Hillary Clinton's right about Benghazi, that Americans really don't care at this point what difference it all makes. And Nancy Pelosi has a genuine, heartfelt love for illegal immigrant children, even ones with TB and scabies. Calling the mainstream media biased in favor of the left isn't that shocking, and saying that the media in general has really strayed from what founding fathers envisioned for the Fourth Estate, a true watchdog rather than lapdog, is an understatement. But I thought I'd give you a few examples of just how institutionalized the idea of a rollover press has become, based on some of my own experiences. After doing some radio in Indiana, I got into print news at a small newspaper in Georgia. One of my first big stories as a police beat reporter was to cover a young girl, 17, who was arrested for tossing her newborn baby into a trash bin on the side of the road. Adding to the story was the fact that this girl's family was wealthy, well-connected. They had some influence in town. I remember going out to the house and knocking on the door to see if the family would talk to me, and leaving my business card on the front porch when nobody answered. I remember going out to the trash bins and taking photos of where the baby's body was found. And I remember the day my story came out in the newspaper, going to a nearby convenience store to buy something and seeing the newspapers on the rack, with the headline blasting across the top about a hurricane that never did hit. My story about the teen who dumped her baby in a trash bin was below the fold. And when I asked my editor why, he shrugged, and he said, "It's still on the front page." And that's when I got my first in-your-face introduction to liberal journalism, where news should be warm and fuzzy and non-offensive. So some years later, after moving to Virginia, I was covering news for the wealthy community of Fauquier County, which is about 45 miles southwest of DC, and it's also a sort of ground zero for the radical environmental crowd. While there, I won a couple of awards for my use of Freedom of Information Act to hold government officials accountable. The publisher, the owner, they liked my work so much, they used to send me little notes saying, "Good job, you'll always have a job here, don't worry." But that was before I started digging into the details of a National Heritage Area initiative that was being pushed by local environmental groups. They said the land designation was just that, a title, and it wouldn't hurt private property rights in the least. I found out the land tag carried a lot more than just a title. It put a ton of regulatory controls on local landowners, homeowners, and business owners, so I started reporting on that angle. I also found out all these other interesting details about some of the environmental groups and activists involved with pushing this National Heritage Area. So I spoke with my immediate editor because I thought it was worthy of some wider coverage and got her permission to pursue a freelance story on the National Heritage Area. I did, and I did a much more thorough investigative piece about all the players and issues involved, just like a reporter's supposed to do. Turns out my publisher didn't appreciate the coverage. He was actually one of the founders of one of the main environmental groups in the community that was pushing for the National Heritage Area. I was ultimately fired. And when I asked why, my editor told me, "What do you expect, writing on something that near and dear to the publisher's heart?" I say maybe, but when I look back now, I also think that's a little bit hypocritical to be in the business of the First Amendment and yet deny First Amendment rights to those who work for you. But it didn't take me long to find another position. I moved on to another community newspaper, Prince William County, Virginia, about 30 miles south of DC. When I joined the local newspaper there, the community was embroiled in a controversial immigration debate where the local police were just given the order from the Board of Supervisors to do background checks to check the status, the immigration status of those they arrested, the 287G program. But I was hired to cover education, so that's what I did. I wrote about how the superintendent pulled in a salary upwards of $220,000 a year, and then tens upon tens of thousands of additional benefits. I posted and publicized all the teachers' and education staffers' salaries. I covered all the travel expenses of the school board anytime they went out of town or attended a conference. In other words, I did my job. And even though I wasn't making friends on the school board, my editors at the time supported me, until I started raising a red flag about a new math program in the school, a fuzzy math program, and started reporting how parents and children alike were struggling with the new standards. The real trouble began when I started pursuing how much this new math program cost for taxpayers to implement. The school wouldn't tell me, no matter how many Freedom of Information Act requests I filed. Even when my editors decided to step in, help out, and hire an attorney to compel the school to provide the requested information, the school still stonewalled. The drama played out for a couple of weeks, and then my publisher stepped in and put a stop to it, said it's time to move on. Turns out my publisher actually served on a board with other members of the education field, including at least one active member of the school board at the time. And he ultimately told me that if I ever wanted to write a story in the newspaper again that mentioned the phrase Freedom of Information Act or the word FOIA, I had to bring the story to him first and get him to read it and sign off on it before it could go to print. So much for the wall between editorial and publishing. Meanwhile, the school completely skated. They never did have to provide the requested information on taxpayer costs. And shortly after, I was taken off that beat and moved on to the county government beat. And because my editors hated the conservative chairman of the Board of Supervisors, the one that they saw at fault for dividing the community over this controversial immigration plan, I was encouraged to dig up all the dirt I could on him, even his drinking habits. It was even suggested at one point the newsroom stake out bars and restaurants to try and catch this guy coming out under the influence. The thing was, he didn't have a drinking problem. What he had was a political problem. He had the misfortune of being a strong conservative in a community with a liberally minded newspaper. And this was the same newspaper that ran a massively biased editorial against Sarah Palin that included, among its tamer statements, the claim, if there was ever any doubt that Sarah Palin is a fool, she has removed it. It just got worse from there. The editorial was so outrageous, so hateful, and so devoid of any supporting facts, I emailed my editor about it as soon as I saw it. I expressed my opposition and asked if perhaps we could write something a little bit more suitable for our newspaper. And her response was a little bit shocking. She welcomed my feedback, but she said the editorial was great because it inspired community discussion. So you already know about the bias in the national media, and I hope this just gives you a few examples of how it starts in your own backyard within your own community newspapers. So you see, by the time most journalists get to the next level in their careers, they've already been given the basic training on how to succeed. Don't rock the boat, don't make waves, unless you're chasing down conservatives, of course. Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize winner, once said the way to fix the field of journalism was to fire 90% of the editors and promote the ones you can't control. I agree. He touched at the core problem with today's press. Without a strong press, who's holding government accountable? Who's holding their feet to the fire when they lie so much that even a 7-year-old girl, my own daughter, can see it and sense it? I include a chapter in my book on the failures of the media to hold government accountable, and I end it this way. This is an excerpt from it. Before the passage of the Stamp Act of 1765, American colonies regarded newspapers in the same vein as books and pamphlets. But then came Samuel Adams, the hard-charging journalist who used words and publishing power to change the shape of policy, to stage somewhat of a revolution against taxes and sway the people to fight back against the Stamp Act. Due in part to his influence, the act was repealed, and he then wrote of the success to the colonial people, but your press has sounded the alarm. Your press has spoken to us the words of truth. It has pointed to this people, their danger and their remedy. It has set before them liberty and slavery. I do think there are a handful of Sam Adams out there today, many of them in this very room. And for those who do fight that good fight, the radio hosts, columnists, broadcasters, journalists, pundits, reporters, the ones who overcome biased editors, a left-leaning system, and no doubt the mocking and condescending attitudes of colleagues, they deserve a very huge thank you. It's because of them we even have a smidgen of understanding of how big and bureaucratic our government has become. One more quote and then I'm done. In 1783, George Washington made a statement that helped bring into being the National Gazette as an independent newspaper rather than one printed by the government. He said, "If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter." My research for Police State USA may have uncovered a lot of what Washington warned, but one big solution for turning back the country to its founding fathers' intent is education, a main job of the press. And I'm heartened by the hard work of some of those in the audience today to do just that. Not just the members of the media, but all who care about the Constitution and fight to defend it. and core patriotic values that made this nation great. I just want to thank you for the inspiration and the motivation to do the same in my career and bring my kids up to think the same way. Long live the First Amendment. God bless you. God bless America. And thank you for listening.